All right, this meeting will come to order. This is the regular meeting of the Land Use and Transportation Committee. My name is Supervisor Malia Cohen. I'm the chair of this committee, and to my right is Supervisor Scott Weiner, who's the vice chair, and on my left is Supervisor Aaron Peskin. Our clerk is Elisa Samara, and at this time I'd like to take a moment and recognize and thank our friends at SF TV, Leo D'Assis and Nona Melkonian, for assisting us in this broadcast. Thank you very much. Madam Clerk, do you have any announcement for us today?
Yes, please make sure to silence all cell phones and electronic devices. Completed speaker cards and copies of any documents to be included as part of the file should be submitted to the clerk. Items acted upon today will appear on the December 6th Board of Supervisors agenda unless otherwise stated.
All right, thank you. Could you call item 1?
Item number 1 is a resolution approving the jurisdictional transfer of 1801 Gerald Avenue, known as Asphalt Plant Site, from Public Works to the Public Utilities Commission, and a portion of 160 Napoleon Street, known as the Napoleon Site, from the Public Utilities Commission to Public Works.
All right. So we have Shelley Campbell from the PUC, and I think we have Sue Black from DPW. Is she here? Sue Black? Okay, great. You both are going to be presenting on this item, and Shelley Campbell, why don't you take it away? Thank you.
Good afternoon, supervisors. I'm Shelby Campbell, project manager at the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission. We're here today before you for the jurisdictional exchange of land between Public Works and the SFPUC. The item before you is vital for the San Francisco Public Utilities Sewer System Improvement Program. The Sewer System Improvement Program is a 20-year, multi-billion-dollar citywide investment required to upgrade our aging infrastructure to ensure a reliable and seismically safe sewer system now and for generations to come. Phase 1 includes 70 projects which total $2.9 billion. 2 of the $2.9 billion is at the Southeast plant, which started up almost 70 years ago. The proposed jurisdictional exchange was initiated to enable the SFPUC to identify sufficient space to rebuild facilities at the Southeast plant. It is an exchange of the SFPUC's Napoleon Yard, which is shown here, located at Evans Avenue in Napoleon, and Public Works' former asphalt plant located at Gerald Avenue and Quint Street. The exchange will benefit both departments with additional space immediately adjacent to their primary facilities in the Bayview. The PUC's Napoleon Yard is adjacent to Public Works Central Yard at Cesar Chavez. The asphalt plant site is adjacent to the PUC Southeast plant. Both properties are just under 1.5 acres, and each department is accepting the properties in their current as-is condition. With that, I would like to introduce you to my colleague at Public Works, Sue Black. Claudia Gorham from Real Estate is also here to answer any questions you may have.
Good afternoon, supervisors. I'm Sue Black, assistant to the Deputy Director of Operations, and I just wanted to let you know that we've worked with the PUC in this endeavor, and we're supportive of it. We store about 120 vehicles rolling stock at the current asphalt plant, and with the acreage that we're getting adjacent to our operations yard, we'll be able to move that equipment easily over to the yard. So just wanted to let you know we're very much in support of the effort. With that, Claudia, would you like to?
No? Okay, I have a quick question for you. So given the proximity to the wastewater facility, this is more, you PUC or DPW?
No, I'm or Public Works.
Sure. Let me direct this to the PUC. I understand that the PUC believes that the property will help complement the capital improvements. This is capital improvements to the wastewater treatment plant.
Right.
Can you tell me how this is a complement?
Right. So we're in dire need of staging area for all of the projects that are going on at Southeast Plant. This site is also under consideration for the future digester program, which would, if it's at the proposed site, would occupy the central shop site, which is north of the asphalt plant. If you look at the diagram, the asphalt plant is just south of where Central Shops is located.
Mm-hmm. So this is just a complement in terms of a staging location. What happens once the rebuild is complete? What happens to this asset?
It would be part of the digester facility, if the digester facility
So in what way?
is constructed here.
Is it, will there be a building on it? Will it be open space? Will it be public art?
Right. So the digester program, and I might have Karen Kubik, who's the head of the program, address your question,
Sure.
Consists of a number of buildings and plazas over the site.
Perfect.
It's about 7 acres total.
Okay, I'm going to call Karen up.
Okay.
Hi, Karen. It's good to see you.
Yes, thanks, Supervisor. I was hoping to stay over there, seated. My name is Karen Kubik, the Director of the Sewer System Improvement Program. And actually, the asphalt plant, when the Sewer System Improvement Program, all the improvements have been completed at Southeast, that would hold the energy recovery facility, where we'll be taking the methane and converting it to power. It'll be sort of a heat and power thing to help the plant really reduce their net load.
Thank you.
So a cogen plant?
Yes, yes.
So that's actually helpful because I was curious to know, like, what are we going to do with this? We're going to acquire, we're going to do the swap, and then what once we're done? I wanted to find a better use than just the staging. So you answered my question. Thank you very much. If there's no other presentations from the city departments, we're good. Let's go ahead and move into public comment. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a special time on the agenda where we opened up to public comment. Everyone will have 2 minutes to speak. You'll hear a soft chime indicating 30 seconds remaining on your time. Please come on up if you have any comment on item 1. Okay, seeing none, item 1 is closed for public comment. Thank you. Colleagues, is there any other discussion on this particular item? If not, I'll take a motion on this item.
I'll move that we send this item to the full board with recommendation and acknowledge that my scheme, together with then Controller Ed Harrington, to make our asphalt plant profitable was an abject failure. So with that, we should do the jurisdictional transfer, and I will move to send it to the full board with recommendation.
All right. Supervisor Peskin, I'm sure this was your plan B.
Yeah, I don't think we figured that out at the time. The digester, with the whole program,
Digester
was
rebuild.
entirely different a decade ago. So,
Well, I'm excited to see the digester project moving forward. As the supervisor that represents the Bayview community, this is incredible. It's about time, and I am eager to get this project underway. So, without objection, this motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Madam Clerk, could you call item 2, please?
Item number 2 is an ordinance amending the planning code and zoning map to rezone the height and bulk designation for 1493 to 1497 Potrero Avenue and making appropriate findings.
Okay, thank you. We've got Aaron Starr from the Planning Department here to present on this item. Welcome, Mr. Starr.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Supervisors. Aaron Starr, Manager of Legislative Affairs for the Planning Department. The item before you is a height reclassification for 1493 to 1497 Potrero Avenue from open space, or OS, to 55X. I'm sorry, to 40X. The application to rezone the height of this property was submitted by Jim Abrams on behalf of the property owner. The original request for height reclassification was to 55X. However, the Commission voted to reclassify the property's height and bulk designation to 40X. This is referenced in the ordinance before you today. The subject property is located at the northeast intersection of Potrero and Cesar Chavez, next to an elevated maze of roadways. The subject property is located within the Showplace Square Potrero area plan. 1493 Potrero is currently developed with a one-story industrial-type building constructed in 1963. Through its investigation into the property, the department found that the Commission confirmed that the Eastern Neighborhoods rezoning rezoned the subject property from M1 to 40X to mixed-use residential open space. The Commission found that the subject property was inadvertently rezoned from 40X to open space as part of the Eastern Neighborhoods rezoning, as an OS designation is primarily reserved for parks and open space and is not intended for privately held developed properties. Further, it's inconsistent to rezone a property to mixed-use residential and then change its height and bulk designation to open space. The Commission voted to recommend approval of the rezoning because the Commission found that the proposed ordinance will allow an error in the city's zoning map to be corrected. However, the Commission also found that an increase in height beyond 40 feet, as the property owner had requested, is not warranted. This property was previously zoned 40X, and the adjacent properties are either zoned 40X or for open space. In addition, the adjacency to the park and a community garden, further recommends against a 55X designation. That concludes my remarks, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Mr. Starr, just for clarification, it can't be zoned P because it's privately owned. I think you said that, right?
I mean, in theory, it could. We just don't normally do that.
Okay. And there's no pending development or proposal at this particular
No, there's
site?
nothing that we have on file for that.
Right. All right, thank you. Colleagues, if there's no questions, let's go to public comment. Thank you, Mr. Starr. All right, public comment is open for item number 2. Please comment up.
Hi, Jim Abrams, counsel to the project sponsor, the property owner. Just want to clarify that this is just a correction of a clerical error that was made in the Eastern Neighborhoods Plan, which changed the height designation from 40 feet to open space, and just wanted to correct the map. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. And also for the record, the Planning Commission has approved this ordinance.
Yeah, the Planning Commission voted to recommend approval with modifications, as I stated.
I appreciate that. Thank you. All right, seeing that there are no other public commenters, public comment is closed at this time. Colleagues, can I have a motion to approve this?
So moved.
Awesome. Thank you. That was a little backwards, but okay. Thank you. Without objection, it passes unanimously. Madam Clerk, could you call 3 and 4 together?
Yes. Item numbers 3 and 4 are ordinances amending the planning code, zoning map, and general plan to revise the height designation on map 5 of the downtown area plan and create the Mission and 9th Street Special Use District and making appropriate findings.
All right, thank you. Supervisor Kim is the author of this item, and I was under the impression that she was going to be joining us today.
You said 3 and 4, right?
I did say 3 and 4. I did. So Supervisor Kim is the author of 3. When she arrives, we'll invite her up. We will just go ahead and skip to the planning presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Supervisors. Anne-Marie Rogers, Planning Department staff. The actions before you are the general plan and planning code amendments for 1270 Mission Street, located in Soma between 8th and 9th Streets. The proposed planning code amendment was sponsored by Supervisors Kim and Peskin, and it would create the Mission and 9th Street Special Use District. The Special Use District would accomplish 3 things. First, it would increase the on-site affordable requirement from 13.5% to 21.5%. And these affordable units shall be made affordable to households at the various AMIs, including 13.5 at 55%, 4% at 70% AMI, and 4% at 90% AMI. The Planning Commission did have an additional recommendation about AMIs. I'll get to that in a second. But first of all, this SUD before you would also waive the floor area ratio limits and exempting the project sponsor from purchasing transferable development rights. Third, the SUD would permit a certain portion of usable open space required to be provided off-site within 900 feet of the SUD. The general plan amendment would update map 5 of the downtown area plan to be consistent with the proposed height changes. To date, staff has received a number of letters of support from business owners and organizations in the vicinity. On October 26th of this year, the Planning Commission voted to recommend approval of both ordinances, and they suggested amendment for your consideration to the SUD. The Planning Commission asked you to consider increasing the amount of on-site affordable units from 21.5% to 25%, with the additional 3.5% to be made affordable to households whose incomes do not exceed 150% of AMI. This concludes staff presentation. I'm available if you have any questions.
Questions for on items 2 or 3? Or 3 and 4, excuse me. I am told that Supervisor Kim is coming down the hallway, so we'll wait. Welcome, Supervisor Kim. We just wrapped up a very brief introduction from the Planning Department and just wanted to give you an opportunity to give some remarks on item 3 and if you wanted, as well as item 4. Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues, for hearing this item. And thank you for also hearing this on November 14th. Which was continued with the general plan amendment today. I'm actually very pleased to sponsor the special use district. It was a very collaborative process over the last 2 years between our neighborhood, our community members, and our project sponsor that helped determine an outcome that put together the desires, comments, and input of all the stakeholders. And one of the best part of it is very little involvement from our office. So I do want to appreciate the community and project sponsor working so closely together in coming up with a project that everyone can support. The proposed rezoning is supported by the Planning Department as appropriate for this location, increasing the number of housing units at a variety of AMI levels, essentially creating a dial that this board has talked about in the past as a policy to serve moderate and middle-income households. This project is also supported by a local development company with its investor CalPERS, the pension fund for the state and municipal employees. As was talked about 2 weeks ago, the project sponsor had 2 years of meetings with the neighbors, community groups, and city staff. They determined a design and a solution that would increase the affordability across a range of incomes, a height and design appropriate for the location consistent with the surrounding buildings, increasing of the base zoning of 13.5% of below market rate at 55% of average median income, which equals a total of 26 units. For a 195-unit building, and a proposed zoning permitting 299 units, of which 25% are below market rate. So 13.5% again at 55% of AMI, 4% at 70%, 4% at 90%, and 3.5% at 150% of average AMI, totaling 75 BMR units, nearly triple the base zoning. The project has received support from the Bayanihan House, Filipino American Development Foundation, United Players, the San Francisco Hack Coalition, Central Market Community Benefits District, the Building and Construction Trades Council, Alliance for Better District 6, along with the San Francisco Quakers and Potter Hotel. There is no opposition that was received during the CEQA process, and the neg deck was certified without any protest. So, colleagues, I do want to thank you for your consideration of the item today. I do need to make one amendment on page 1, line 25, which just deletes at the same hearing. It's just a technical grammatical amendment. So thank you, and thanks again to the project sponsor.
And I will move that technical amendment.
All right, let's move that. Let's take public comment, and then we'll move the technical amendment, and we'll move forward. All right, ladies and gentlemen, items 3 and 4 have been called together. Would you like to come and testify, share public comment?
Thank you, supervisors. Thank you for the time. Eric Tao, AGI Avant. Yes, it has been a collaborative effort, and throughout the process, I want to thank the community. I want to thank city staff. I want to thank the supervisors' offices for working with us and coming up with a solution that works well for the community, works well for city planning, and also supports the return and investment principles of the California Public Employees Retirement System. I really believe that this city can work together and produce good outcomes that's supported by all. I'm here to answer any questions you may have. Thank you again.
Thank you, Mr. Tao. Is there anyone else here? None? Okay, public comment is closed. All right, Supervisor Peskin, did you have that motion ready for us? Technical amendments?
The technical amendment to Supervisor Kim, would you like to read that?
Sure, I can read it again. It's just on page 1 at line 25. I'm just asking the committee to delete at the same hearing.
At the same hearing. All right, that's
easy. And that
easy.
is the only amendment.
Okay.
So
I did not make copies of that. My apologies.
Not a problem.
So I would move that.
Without objection, unanimously passes. All right, it's adopted. Thank you. All right, now what about the entire body? Mr. Peskin, can you make a motion?
I would move to send the items with the amendment to the full board with recommendation.
All right, thank you. And without objection, that motion passes unanimously. Madam Clerk, could you please call item 5?
Item number 5 is an ordinance amending the planning code to establish a citywide transportation demand management program that requires development projects to support sustainable forms of transportation, create a new administrative fee, and make appropriate findings.
All right, thank you. Let's get to the meat of why we all have come today. Item number 5. Supervisor Avalos, thank you for joining us this afternoon. He is the author of this item and will be making a short presentation followed by planning staff. And the planning staff will go through the TDM program details. Supervisor Avalos, you ready? The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chair Cohen. We have before us the ordinance that would establish the Transportation Demand Management Program, which is actually part of our Transportation Sustainability Program. It's part 3 of that, and it's part of a new way that we're looking at how to build our buildings in San Francisco that align with a new version of how we measure usage of cars in San Francisco, going towards vehicle miles traveled from level of service. We are also looking at how to shift places where people live and work from how they use transportation toward transit, walking, cycling, and using public transportation. This is a huge effort that has been going on for many years that planning has been involved in, and it's really geared towards having better health outcomes for how we do construction, to increase the quality of our air, enhance the quality of our air, and also healthy lifestyles as well. That will have huge impacts for how we address our climate situation here in San Francisco by lowering the amount of miles that vehicles travel. That will lower emissions, which are have the greatest impact towards climate change. This measure, I believe, is going to take more than today's hearing to be able to suss out. I expect that I'm introducing a series of hearings today that will happen. I do not believe, based on what I've heard from colleagues and what I've heard from other departments, that we're not going to be able to pass this measure until after I'm out of office. I do believe that the concept that's here before us today is a sound one, but I don't believe everyone's familiar with it yet for it to actually get to passage this year. I'm actually saying that at the beginning of my talking points because that's really the temperature I've heard from a lot of colleagues. So today really is our first chance to get into the legislative process here at the Board of Supervisors, a discussion about transportation demand management, and it'll be heavy on presentations from SFMTA, the Transportation Authority, and planning to talk about where we're at, how we got to this measure. And then we'll also be hearing from other people in the public who might have, additions or amendments to make to this legislation. I do have some amendments that I would like to make, and I have ready here today that will ask the committee later to accept after public comment. But essentially, it's recognizing that there are differences between projects that are in the health and human services realm and affordable housing projects that really should have a different kind of consideration, especially in terms of some of these projects do not have a high level of vehicle usage attached to them, especially residential. So I think it's important that we actually have some nuance in that approach, especially when it comes to nonprofits in the health and human services field. There also are nonprofits in the health and human services field who are heavily use transportation, that are part of their model is to share food or to provide shuttle services or to provide transportation services that I think is worthy of consideration in terms of how we craft legislation moving forward. So I will be introducing these amendments towards some findings and addressing some of these issues related to Health and Human Services nonprofits. And if there are no other members of the committee who would like to talk, we can go right to presentations from our different departments. And first up, we have Cheryl Brinkman, SFMTA Board of Directors. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much, supervisors. I'm so thrilled. I'm Cheryl Brinkman, Vice Chair of the SFMTA Board of Directors, and I'm thrilled to be here today to speak in support of this ordinance. We are so fortunate to live in such a thriving, growing city. San Francisco is expected to add 190,000 jobs and 100,000 homes by 2040. To keep our people moving as San Francisco grows, the city's already doing a tremendous amount to address our current and future transportation needs. But we need to do one big thing. We need to get new development to do their fair share and reduce the amount of driving. This is going to help not only our current, but our new citizens. Not every trip must be made by a car, as Supervisor Avalos noted. The focus of this program is to support new residents and tenants in making trips by non-driving modes and give them choices about how to do this. The ordinance before you today would do just that. The ordinance is innovative, it's imperative, and it's timely. Adopting it will keep our city moving, our air clean, and our neighborhoods livable by having developers do their fair share and provide more transportation options with their project. This ordinance is data-driven, and it's informed by the latest research and the best practices. It will be flexible, it will be responsive, it has a commitment to monitoring the outcomes, and it's transparent in a way that we've not seen before and allowing citizens to really see what's going to go on with this development. We're already hearing from other cities that they're looking to this ordinance as a model of the most comprehensive, data-driven, and effective approach to transportation demand management for development. This is our opportunity to once again be a model city for the rest of the nation and be a laboratory for new ideas. People want options. They've shown us that in increasing numbers on transit, on foot, and on bicycles. The result of this ordinance will be sustainable transportation options for a building's tenants, which benefits not only the local neighborhood, but the city as a whole. It's possible to grow smartly. We're on that path. This is a key step, and now is the time to take it. So I thank you very much, and I look forward to this ordinance moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Brinkman.
Good afternoon again, Anne-Marie Rogers, Planning Department staff. And first, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the coordination that's happened between these three agencies today. The staff expertise and the resources provided to this effort led to a very forward-thinking program. I'd like to express my sincere appreciation and thanks to the project teams at the MTA, the Transportation Authority, and our own Planning Department for their years of dedication and hard work. We've already made tremendous progress as a city with the Transportation Sustainability Program. This TSP is made up of 3 parts: Invest, Align, and Shift. 2 of the 3 are already adopted: Invest and Align. These 2 programs together exchange reduced CEQA process for a fee that goes towards actual transportation improvements. And now today you're going to hear about the 3rd component, Shift. TDM seeks to, or the Transportation Demand Management Program, seeks to minimize car trips in new development and support more sustainable choices by the residents. San Francisco is a national and international leader in environmental policy and regulation. Other cities look to us for innovative solutions, and this is a key step in growing smarter as a city. So with that, I'd like to introduce Carly Payne from the MTA.
And I have a couple of handouts for the clerk. And can we do the slideshow? Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Carly Payne from SFMTA, and I'll be joined with Corey Teague, the Assistant Zoning Administrator from Planning. We are honored to represent a really terrific multi-agency team from the Planning Department, SFMTA, and the Transportation Authority, and present to you for your consideration a proposed Transportation Demand Management Ordinance for new development. San Francisco is growing, and we physically can't add additional capacity for more automobiles to our roadway network. And even if we could, that would be counter to our transit first policy, our health and safety goals, and our greenhouse gas emissions and other environmental goals. What that means is that instead we need to invest in expanding sustainable transportation choices and use our system more efficiently to support people in choosing sustainable modes for their trips. The good news is that the city is already hard at work to expand our transportation system, to enhance transportation services, manage demand, and to plan for the next generation of transportation needs. And while the city is undertaking all of these efforts, we're also asking new development to play a part in improving the transportation system and shape new trips. Before you today is the third component of this transportation sustainability program. And as you know, the TSP is focused on keeping people moving as our city grows. As Anne-Marie outlined, 2 of the 3 components are already in place, and we're here now with the third component, shift, which is really a change in how new developments shape transportation choices for site users to reduce the need to drive. And the shift component also links the first 2 components by supporting people in using transit and walking and biking and in reducing vehicle miles traveled, which is what the aligned component measured. So SHIFT proposes an amendment to the Planning Code to create a transportation demand management ordinance focused on new development. There is, I'll just note briefly, there's a broad world of transportation demand management that the city and other entities are engaged in, focused on broader audiences. What we are talking about today is really focused on new development and the users of those sites. So development-focused TDM includes physical measures, incentives, information, and resources that support sustainable trip choices. These are measures that are controlled by the developer or property owner and are really focused on the trips of residents, tenants, and visitors to a site. TDM for development is not new to San Francisco. We have a number of measures already in the planning code, such as unbundling parking for residential uses, requiring bicycle parking, things like that. But to employ the full power of transportation demand management, we need to do better. Our proposal has been informed by best practices for development-focused TDM across the country, including things like having a holistic program that's really focused on a goal. Our goal is about reducing vehicle miles traveled, linking TDM requirements to how much parking is provided on site. There's substantial data that demonstrates that provision of on-site parking is the most powerful determiner of whether someone chooses to drive or not. Monitoring to ensure compliance with the requirements and remaining nimble and up-to-date and flexible. So the primary goal, obviously, is about transportation and mobility, but there are also additional benefits from better environmental outcomes, improved public health, and an improved planning process as transportation demand management measures get integrated into projects from the beginning with transparency in a consistent manner and standardized, instead of in a more ad hoc way that we see today. The TDM ordinance was part of the broad outreach that was done for the overall transportation sustainability program and mentioned in the outreach for the TSF, but we've done targeted outreach beyond that for the past year, and the input we've received from the various commissions and stakeholders and developers and others have been reflected and informed our proposal. So I am going to turn it over to Corey Teague from Planning to walk you through the details of the ordinance.
Thank you very much. Mr. Teague.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Corey Teague with the Planning Department. It's great to be here today. We're obviously very excited about this program. It's been a lot of hard work, and we've worked very hard together on it. I'm going to talk about how it would actually work, how individual projects would be subject to and would use the proposed TDM program. The first thing to point out is the structure of the program, because it is a little unique in the sense that what's before you today is an ordinance that would amend the planning code to essentially create the TDM program and the requirements and create that structure within the code. However, there are 3 other important documents that are very important to the program. The first are the TDM standards, which were adopted by the Planning Commission in August of this year. The Appendix A of those standards includes all of the individual TDM measures in detail that a project may use in their TDM plan. And then we also have a TDM technical justification document. As Carly mentioned, this is a very data-driven program, so we wanted to have a document that really put in writing all of that data that we used and the methodologies that we used to develop the system. She also mentioned that TDM is a very dynamic field, and we are looking to use proven measures. So the TDM standards are able to be updated more nimbly this way to reflect current data, current research, whether it from projects within our own city or the nation at large. So the ordinance would specifically state that the TDM program would apply to projects that create 10 or more dwelling units. There is an exclusion for 100% affordable housing. It would also apply to the new construction of non-residential uses of more than 10,000 square feet, so office buildings or retail, for example. Then for changes of use within an existing building, that would be a higher bar. That would only apply to projects that are more than 25,000 square feet in size and are changing between the use categories that we have established in the program. So how will it work in general? I think there's a theme you'll hear, which is we want this program to be something that developers think about very early on in the development process, that they really think about how they're going to incorporate this into their project and how it will impact their project. They will be required to submit a TDM plan with their first development application, and that will be reviewed in conjunction with the application, the overall development application, as part of a code compliance check, just like any other code requirement. If the project is required to go to the Planning Commission, then there would be a condition of approval that the project meet the TDM program requirements. So how specifically will the program work for projects? Well, in principle, each project will receive a target, a number of points that they need to achieve, and then they will have a menu of options to select measures from to achieve that number of points. But specifically, the starting point is determining a project's target, and it is entirely based on how much parking the project proposes. Simply speaking, the more parking that is proposed for the project, the higher the target. Once you determine the target for a project, then you have to determine how are you going to meet that target. Again, I refer to Appendix A of the standards that has the detailed listing of all the measures in the menu. Some of the measures scale. So, for example, bike parking has 4 levels. Level A is just simply the amount that the code requires, and then it scales up from there so you can get additional points. So if you count the scaling of certain measures, in total there are 66 measures that are available for a project to select. All of these measures, again, are based on research and data in the field, and they are assigned point values based on their proven efficacy. So, for example, things that may only achieve 1 point, such as showers and lockers. There are some items that are more effective, like additional levels of bike parking may achieve 2, 3, 4 points. And then there are measures that are proven to be even more effective, such as transit subsidies and reduced parking overall, and those receive higher point values. And going to the parking issue, again, the amount of parking you provide at the project helps determine your target, but you can also achieve points by parking at or below your neighborhood rate. And so what is the neighborhood rate? The map you see here is the city broken down into its individual transportation analysis zones, somewhat analogous to census tracts, and we use these zones for transportation analysis here in the city. We have a statistical model that uses a certain amount of real data that we'll touch on later to determine what the existing neighborhood parking rate is in each of these zones for residential and non-residential uses. Again, if you park at your neighborhood rate, you achieve a point, and for every 10% reduction in parking rate, you can achieve an additional point. So something else that's very exciting about this program is that, for a long time we were just talking about it. At one point we had an Excel tool that was very functional but not very pretty. that people could use, and that's still what we have on our website. But we have also developed a much more user-friendly online TDM tool. It is in beta. It's not out for the public, but we have been using it with our stakeholder meetings to really help people be able to understand how to use the program and how it will work for their project. I was going to show you that tool to give you an idea. Unfortunately, because it is beta and sometimes our technologies don't align, it didn't appear to look quite as nice as we usually see it when we're using it in our office. So I don't think I will show you the tool today, but we would be happy to show you any other time. We really are proud of it, and it is incredibly user-friendly. It's simply point and click for the measures, and it's point and click to pull up all kinds of information and details about the individual measures you may be selecting. So once a project determines its target and it selects the measures that it wants to use to achieve its target score, and the project gets approved, another part that we're excited about is a very rigorous implementation strategy. Most of the requirements in the planning code do not have a proactive monitoring and reporting requirement. We are essentially a complaint-based department when it comes to that. However, the city has approved budgeted staff in our department to specifically work on the monitoring and reporting requirements for this program. So essentially, before the certificate of occupancy for a project, planning department staff would do a site visit, make sure that the physical measures are in place, whether it's the correct number of parking spaces, the right amount of bicycle parking, et cetera. Make sure that's in line. And then once the certificate of occupancy is issued, 18 months later, that project is required to submit a report back to the planning department documenting how they are continuing to meet the requirements of their TDM plan. That reporting requirement is annual for 5 years, and if they have no compliance issues for 5 years, that would move from annual to every 3 years. But the key there is that we're going to be much more proactive in making sure that these measures stay in place for the life of the project. Additionally, this will allow us to do some of our own data collection and research at those projects so we can help determine how effective measures are in San Francisco that different projects are selecting. And so that's an important element to keep in mind, is that not only do we plan to monitor the projects for staying within compliance of the TDM plan, but we also want to make sure that the program itself is staying updated. So we do plan to update the standards over time to reflect new research and information that's available. And again, that's both from kind of primary research here in San Francisco and also research that's done from around the country. And that research may indicate new measures that we haven't included before that are now proven to be effective. Or we may determine that some of the measures have the wrong point value. Maybe they should go down, maybe they should go up. Maybe we need to clarify some of the language and some of the measures to make it clear what is really required of the project. We want to make sure that the program is effective. That's our overall goal here. Additionally, every 4 years, we will be doing an analysis and a report of the program, and that timeline is in line with the countywide transportation plan timeline. As Carly mentioned, we did a lot of outreach. We did a lot of work kind of one-on-one with individuals and individual groups. One thing we can say is almost every single person or group we spoke to was very supportive of the program overall and the policy. Of course, some people had some issues about some of the specifics, and we've been working with them a lot on that issue. But by and large, we've received a huge amount of support from this project. Some of the list here, all of the commissions that reviewed it recommended its approval unanimously. And we have a long list of groups here. We have others, too, that were also supportive in general, but as I mentioned, had wanted the program to go even further or be tweaked in certain ways. So what were some of the stakeholder input we received? We heard that they didn't want it to be disproportional on smaller projects. Maybe TNCs or ride shares should be somehow permitted as TDM measures. How would the program deal with kind of parking garages or non-accessory parking? Could there be exemptions for more uses other than affordable housing? So we took all of those in. We looked at all of them specifically. The planning case report from August 4th, we gave very detailed responses to many of these issues, although some of them we've continued to work on since that time. And to that point, we did pass out a memo that outlines some of the potential changes that could occur to the program. The first one here, parking garages, actually is not on that memo because we actually addressed that to some degree at the Planning Commission in August. There was concern that people would build parking garages into their projects and then kind of use them as de facto accessory parking to kind of get around the program. We feel like that's primarily a land use and enforcement issue, and the enforcement is going to be great for these projects because we have the monitoring program. But we still did want to acknowledge that potential issue, and so we did change the standards to require some or all of those extra parking spaces to be counted towards a project target. The other three issues are issues we've worked on very hard since the Planning Commission, and they were outlined in the memo that we gave you. That memo, specifically for the phasing plan, if we go straight to the end, the memo reflects a phasing plan that was under consideration, that we had worked on with the mayor's office and talked to different supervisors about. Supervisor Avalos, with his legislation, has a slightly alternative method that we can discuss as well. But specifically, the phasing plan in the memo would allow projects that submitted a development application by September 4th of this year, which was when the Board of Supervisors received the Planning Commission's recommendation, they would only have to meet 50% of their target. And then projects that file between September 4th of this year and the end of next year, 2017, would only have to meet 75% of their target. And then projects that file January 1st, 2018 and on, they would be subject to their full 100% target. As we mentioned, we want this program to be something that developers consider very early on and factor into their pro forma and really help shape their project. And we recognize that projects that are already in the pipeline, there could be some difficulty there, and so that was part of the rationale behind the phasing plan. We also heard that there could be some adjustments made to make sure that it wasn't disproportionately bad for small projects. And we did find that we had capped the target, a minimum of 13 points, and that kind of disincentivized smaller projects, maybe like 10 to 20 or 30 units, to actually reduce parking a little bit more. So we are proposing to amend the target at the lower end to be a little more granular to allow for a lower target for really low amounts of parking. And then I touched on the parking rates. The original rates that we have and the map that we use in the standards that was adopted by the Planning Commission used a statistical analysis to estimate those rates. As I mentioned, since then, we have been conducting a more data-driven approach using building permit data from DBI to determine how many how many parking spaces are on more sites. We have a sample size that's fairly robust already at this point, even though that effort is not complete, and we feel comfortable using those updated parking rates, which by and large resulted in an average increase in neighborhood parking rates in most, if not all, of the transportation analysis zones. So that is an overview of how the program would work, and that concludes our presentation. We're happy to take any questions.
Thank you. So you said you have additional amendments that you're recommending?
So just to be clear, the memo that we submitted are changes that would need to be made to the TDM standards, which the Planning Commission will be required to update. They are not amendments to the ordinance that is before you today.
Great. Thank you. Colleagues, any comments, questions?
Questions or comments, we could go to public comment, or if there's other presentations.
We have Director Tilly Chang.
Good afternoon, Chair Cohen, Supervisors. Tilly Chang, Director of the County Transportation Authority. Just wanted to echo my colleagues' comments. I'm pleased to join with our partners from Planning Department and SFMTA and many folks in the public to urge your consideration of the ordinance today. The legislation, as you know, is a culmination of many years of interagency collaboration amongst our various agencies, which particularly benefited from the leadership of the Planning Department. I want to thank and recognize Director Graham, former ERO and now SFMTA Planning Director Sarah Jones, and her key staff from the Planning Department days, Wade Whitgrave and Rachel Schuett. As you know, and for folks watching from home, this is the final component of a 3-part transportation sustainability program designed to better link land use and transportation policy and decision making, and thereby shape San Francisco's growth to be as low impact as possible from a traffic and carbon standpoint. By passing this legislation, the city would be able to more effectively reduce the impact of new development on our transportation system at the most important stage of decision making, the approval of the project. And it does so by providing sponsors with their choice of a range of specific on-site improvements and design features that have been shown to encourage the use of sustainable modes, walking, bicycling, transit, and ride sharing. The benefits of this policy cannot be overstated. As the interagency team knows, we've all been tracking the research and practice, and this linkage of on-site demand management measures is clearly the most effective and cost-effective way to achieve trip reduction by far. It is also practical and fair. If approved, we're committed to supporting the city's ongoing monitoring and evaluation of the program, implementation of the program, bringing a research-focused and performance-based approach to our work, and keeping you and the public regularly informed about its effectiveness. In closing, I urge your support for this legislation. I'd like to thank Supervisor Avalos for your leadership, and to all of you for your ongoing guidance and support for this work over the years. Thank you.
Thank you. Before public comment, just a question for Mr. Teague. If you could go a little bit deeper in explaining when a project does not meet its TDM standard, what are the different options that kick in at that point, and what if there's a real obstinance to doing that? What is the recourse that we have to ensure compliance?
Sure. So as proposed, meeting your TDM plan requirement is simply a requirement of the project to be approved. As drafted right now, we do not have an option for exceptions or variances, but the menu is very diverse, and it gives project sponsors, especially if they're incorporating this and thinking about this very early in their project, there's a lot of opportunity to mix and match measures to meet the requirement. Some of the measures are, very physical, capital intensive, whether it's, reducing parking or providing more bicycle parking or providing more car share. Some of them have no impact on the actual design or, kind of the space needs of the project, and are simply costs for measures that provides, for example, subsidies for transit passes or car share memberships or bike share membership. So we feel like there's enough flexibility there that a project can work with the tool and the program early on to find a TDM plan that is achievable for them.
So when you actually now have a project sponsor who is signed off on a particular TDM plan, you go a year out, and in terms of monitoring, they're not living up to that plan, what happens at that point?
At that point, it becomes a standard compliance and enforcement issue like any other for the planning code. So essentially, if we go out to inspection, for example, before the certificate of occupancy, and there's some physical component of their TDM plan that is not correct, that would need to be corrected before they could get their certificate of occupancy. If you go longer into, if you're in year 2 or year 3, and they're not providing some type of incentive or some type of measure that they are required to do, they're going to have an opportunity to correct that, to abate that, and if they don't, then we would basically go through a standard violation enforcement process, which would be a notice of violation, opportunity for appeal, as well as fines if we got to that point.
May I add something? Sure. One thing to add is in our current, most of our planning code is complaint-based, and we would be actively monitoring, and so we would have standardized reporting forms, and so it's not we happen to find out they're not in compliance. It is totally proactive, and so it's while we're using and relying on the standard enforcement process, finding out about compliance is vastly different than the rest of the planning code.
And if I may, through the chair, and you'll sustain this proactive enforcement regimen with what ongoing source of revenue?
Well, we did budget staff. There are application fees associated with the development of and approval of the TDM plan on the front end, as well as the monitoring and reporting. When you submit your annual reports, there is a fee with that application as well. Additionally, there are many projects from the past that have been required to do some amount of TDM planning, and there are conditions of approval there that also need to be monitored. So we have looked at it and dedicated those application fees and staff time, and the requirement is will be in the code to conduct this monitoring and reporting.
So the fees that accompany the annual submission of reports are sufficient enough to actually pay for the number of FTE that you need?
That's my understanding.
So how large are those fees?
The annual fee, as it's proposed now, $1,000? Yeah. So right now it's $1,000.
So, and that would be in the future presumably borne by a homeowners association after the developer sells those, and
correct. Whoever the ownership of the property is.
And that would be part of covenants, conditions, and restrictions that they would be required to put in their CC&Rs?
I can't speak directly to what they'd be required to put in their CC&Rs, but they would be conditioned. There would be a notice of special restrictions recorded on the site indicating that that is the adopted TDM plan, and they are required to provide those TDM measures for the life of the project.
I'll believe it when I see it.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Supervisor Peskin. Anyone else? I'm sorry, are you making a presentation?
Is it public comment or?
Okay, yeah. Yes, we're open for public comment at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, supervisors, for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Megan Weir, and I'm the director of the Program on Health Equity and Sustainability in the Environmental Health Branch of the Department of Public Health. I'm happy to be here today to support the Transportation Demand Management Ordinance and Program Standards, which we feel have the potential to positively impact public health in San Francisco. For many years, our program has worked to support strategies that improve air quality, transportation safety, and active transportation, 3 priorities from DPH's Population Health Strategic Plan, and reducing VMT is essential to achieving these goals, and we believe that the TDM program could be an important strategy for VMT reduction. With planned increases in housing and jobs, it is estimated that more than 600,000 new cars could be added to the streets of San Francisco if we maintain the status quo. This would result in not just untenable congestion, but significant reductions in quality of life. More pedestrians will be injured or killed in our streets, air quality would worsen, and the efficiency of public transportation would decline. It's essential that we enact policies to reduce car trips and create systems that support walking, biking, and transit use. The TDM program takes a smart approach to reducing VMT by providing greater credit to interventions that are strongly linked to driving, such as parking reduction and shuttle services, while also offering additional options such as bicycle facilities, on-site childcare, and healthy food retail. Additionally, we appreciate the flexibility of the program's construction, which will allow for swift adjustments to the standards and guidance based on best practices in VMT reduction. We are also pleased to see built-in monitoring and accountability measures, as current TDM requirements in the planning code lack ongoing oversight. In conclusion, we believe city transportation policies that are consistent with the prioritization of human health and well-being are key to meaningful improvements in pedestrian safety, outdoor air quality, and active transportation. We support the TDM ordinance and program standards and look forward to ongoing collaboration with the Planning Department, MTA, and other city agencies to advance the health of people who live, work, learn, and play in San Francisco. Thank you.
Next speaker.
Eileen Boken, District 4 resident, here requesting a continuance. If this item is not continued, I would like to ask, how would the TDM actually work? Is it yet another ideological concept being put forth by the Planning Department, CTA, and MTA? Mr. Teague at one point referred to, and I quote, certain amount of real data. That's troubling. There was also a reference to targeted outreach. Also, could that be code word for preaching to the choir? An example is the photograph promoting TDM. There's a photo of a streetcar, a bicyclist, and a skateboarder sharing the street. Does this suggest that skateboarding is considered a valid means of transportation? Also, most of those featured in the photograph are under 30 years old. This does not represent the current demographics of the city. Finally, the city applied for a federal grant for smart cities, which meant using driverless cars. How is TDM consistent with this? Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Ariel Fleischer, and I am a Transportation Policy Associate with SPUR. SPUR is a nonprofit organization that promotes good planning and good government in the Bay Area through research, education, and advocacy. I would like to express our support for the TDM program. SPUR believes that it's important to be thoughtful about how we manage transportation impacts in the city and ensure that new development fits with our transit-first policy. San Francisco is expected to add almost 200,000 jobs and 100,000 homes by 2040. More housing and more jobs means more people using already strained roads and public transit. We need to be doing everything we can to address future transportation needs. Unprecedented gridlock is what we'll see if we don't get smarter about our development practices, ensure that developments do their fair share, and provide more transportation options with their projects. SPUR cares about creating better ways to get around without a car. If the city is to meet its environment and livability goals, we need to shift trips away from driving towards sustainable modes of getting around, like walking, biking, and transit. The TDM program will help the city meet this goal by supporting new residents and tenants in making trips by non-driving modes and giving them choices about how to do this. City partners have conducted extensive research, including on-the-ground data collection locally, and have built an actionable program that works. The ordinance is data-driven and informed by latest research and best practices, and it provides the city with the enforcement teeth to make sure that projects follow through on their commitments. SPUR has been a longstanding supporter of the Transit First policy and of the entire Transportation Stability Program. The city adopted the first two components of the TSP, and now it's time to fulfill the promise of the remainder of the program. Up to today, developers have approved TDM in an ad hoc manner. It hasn't been strategic, transparent, or consistent, and it hasn't been to the benefit of the city and our communities. The TDM ordinance is innovative, timely, and imperative. People need and deserve better ways to get where they need to go now and in the future. For these reasons, SPUR urges the committee to support this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Kathy DeLuca. I'm the Policy and Program Manager at Walk San Francisco. For the last year, Walk SF and Livable City have been meeting with city staff about the TDM ordinance, and we want to thank staff for all the hard work that they've put into it. It's a really important step forward in the city's work to manage and reduce congestion. We're supportive of the approach of this TDM ordinance, but we are seeking 4 amendments that we think are crucial to make the ordinance more effective and robust. To that end, we have 4 amendments, and with these amendments, the ordinance would have the full support of Walk SF and Livable City. The first, we think all parking, including all non-accessory parking, should be subject to the TDM ordinance. We know that parking generates auto trips, and we don't want to see any parking fall through the cracks. Second, we think the TDM goals should be linked to neighborhood traffic reduction goals. So currently, the TDM ordinance asks new projects to manage their auto trips so that they don't exceed current neighborhood rates of trip generation. But this means that already congested neighborhoods will become unacceptably congested as they develop. Trip reduction targets must be based on neighborhood infrastructure and goals rather than a rate derived from past developments. Third, Walk SF especially strongly believes that the TDM menu of options should include more items that encourage walking, and that these items should have more points. Currently, there's only one menu item that encourages pedestrian amenities, and it's only worth 1 point. And we think this is an unacceptably minimal incentive to encourage developers to encourage walking. Finally, we think the ordinance should eliminate minimum parking requirements. We know that parking generates auto trips. So if adding parking increases these trips, why do we require it? It doesn't make sense to require parking and then have an ordinance that asks developers to compensate for the amount of parking we build. We think we should just let developers not have to build parking in the first place. So we hope you'll consider these amendments to make this a robust policy. Thank you.
Just a follow-up question. What would you see as menu options that would encourage greater walking?
So we've actually given items to staff. So just more, the research now for walking, okay, let me start over. The research that the TDM team used to determine what would go in the menu is based on a reduction in vehicle miles traveled. There's not a lot of research that actually links walking amenities to a reduction in vehicle miles traveled. There is a lot of research, though, that shows what stops people from walking. So it's sort of there's a lot of research that shows what we could put in place that would encourage more walking, which would in turn reduce vehicle miles traveled. So we'd like to see the menu include those items, even though there's not direct research on vehicle miles traveled reduction. So, and we have that, and we can share it specifically.
That'll be good to see because I'm interested in examples of what that would be.
Okay.
I mean, certainly our TSF, our fee, funds amenities for supporting walking and generally across the city, but now we're talking about a specific project within that project itself that would.
And I'll tell you, in general, it's lighting and landscaping are some of the very sort of heavy hitters. So sort of calling those out specifically and giving those sort of more points was an example of something that we had suggested earlier.
And some have a dual impact, like wayfinding signs that are in the buildings that also can have a dual impact on reducing travel by trips by car, but also encouraging walking. Okay. I believe just the last comment.
Sure.
Minimum parking requirements, I see as, an important goal to eliminate those. This legislation isn't probably the best place to do that. That could happen elsewhere, and this legislation could follow suit in terms of it doesn't have to be changed to be able to address the elimination of minimum requirements.
And we'd be very happy to see it move forward. We'd be fine with it moving forward sort of in parallel in a separate ordinance as well. We don't feel like it has to be part of this ordinance, but it should be addressed.
Okay, and then after public comment, I'm going to ask planning staff to address the comment that was made, your first point around non-accessory parking.
Okay.
Because I think that's important. They talked about it in their presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Corey Smith, speaking on behalf of the 300 members of the San Francisco Housing Action Coalition, also speaking here in support. Like many of the other organizations, we've been involved for years, and I want to thank all the different departments for their collaboration. 3 quick points. Vehicle miles traveled. Parking and alternative transportations is one of the 8 criteria that we use to evaluate residential development projects. So it's really one of the pillars of our evaluations, and whenever possible, we're always pushing for less cars, more bike parking, more walkability. So we're really excited that that's one of the main measurements. Regarding flexibility in the menu, more flexibility ultimately means that developers and many of our members are going to have more options to deliver the highest amount of public benefit possible. So as wide as that menu can be that does deliver public goods, we are totally supportive of it. And then in terms of the ongoing monitoring and enforcement, it is certainly needed, and we absolutely encourage collaboration and transparency to make sure that everybody does their measurable fair share going forward into the future. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. I'm Matt Field with TMG Partners. We support the concept of TDM. However, we are concerned that the program is dependent on analyzing parking per unit, but doesn't really consider the number of bedrooms in those units. And by focusing on the units alone, may actually not accurately represent the demand being generated for parking out of those units or driving. And in particular, we would like you to consider whether looking at multi-bedroom units, and in particular family housing in our districts of the city, should be considered in this ordinance slightly differently. We do think that families use parking differently, and we think that parking in many of the R districts is different. So we would ask that you consider continuing this item to consider this issue and other amendments before you. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. I'm Sam Alicia Duke, kind of an activist for the 30 years I've lived in the city. I'm with the Paratransit Coordinating Council, and I'm with the Pedestrians Safe Squad. We're not concerned. We're very happy to see this going forward. There was mention made about public transportation. The buildings that they put up on Market have eliminated bus stops and have eliminated sidewalks and have eliminated all kinds of things. I am hoping that the program we're putting forward will see to it that the developers take into consideration the drop-off spaces for taxis, for vans that transport disabled people, for vans that deliver food to seniors. They should all be taken into consideration in doing sidewalks and streets in front of all of the buildings. The Third and Mission project that has the museum and the eventual Millennium Tower building going up, they had legal suits brought against them because they did not originally have any considerations for these kinds of things that are so vital. And we need the ramps and things to be able to get to the buses, which shouldn't be taken away. They should be more available to us. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Debbie Lerman. I'm with the San Francisco Human Services Network, and I'm here today to echo the introductory comments of Supervisor Avalos around including an exemption for community-based health and human service nonprofits, particularly those that are city-funded to serve disadvantaged populations. This would be complementary to the exemption in the ordinance for affordable housing. TDM would impose onerous new requirements on programs that do not generate significant vehicle miles traveled, with very minimal benefits to the community. We once again seem to be dragged into a program where we are not the problem. Health and human service nonprofits in San Francisco, by and large, are neighborhood-based and serve clients who live in those neighborhoods, and we have data that shows that. Clients are predominantly low income, and the Department of Transportation has done extensive studies showing that households in poverty are lower in their vehicle usage and vehicle ownership, and also have higher rates of alternative modes of transportation, public transit, walking, bicycles, carpools, etc. So we are not generating significantly miles traveled, and at the same time this program would impose transit fees on charitable organizations that serve the poor. We feel that is inappropriate, again, particularly for those that are city funded. This body rejected by a vote of 9-2 a couple of years ago, imposing fees on nonprofits under the TSP. This program would impose application fees and annual monitoring fees on nonprofits, often those that have city grants or contracts to reduce the burden on, that reduce the city's burden on providing services to disadvantaged clients. And it makes no sense at all to, with the one hand, give grants and contracts to these organizations to serve people who are low income, and with the other hand, take ongoing funds for fees that would ultimately mean that you need more money from the city to provide those services. Also, many nonprofits just don't fit this office space model within the TDM framework. A lot of nonprofits are city funded to provide services that require them to have parking spaces for service-related vehicles. If you provide paratransit, any kind of shuttle services for seniors or people who have disabilities, or if you're delivering food to people who are sick or low income. Those are the kinds of programs where you may have a significant number of vehicles and need to provide parking spaces for them in their development. Those parking spaces should not be included in any assessment under TDM. So we believe that nonprofit health and human service nonprofits should be exempted from these programs, again, particularly those that are city funded. Or at most that there should be a delay on implementing it for those types of organizations and take a good look at the data and develop more flexible requirements that are more appropriate. It's fine to require bike racks and things like that, but we shouldn't be imposing fees, and we shouldn't be imposing as stringent requirements on those that are not generating significant vehicle miles. Thank you.
Ms. Lerman, I have a couple questions for you. You really raise an interesting idea. I'm curious to know what's the number of organizations that we're talking about, or the number of development companies that are out there that would fit into this specific niche? I can't think of one that comes to my mind, but can you help me?
Well, there have been. I don't know exactly which programs would have been subject. I know that there's a big development right now down on Van Ness for Health Right 360, perhaps that. I think Goodwill has development going. So there may have been programs that would have fit in. It may be a very small number, which is great, because that means that the city wouldn't be giving up significant benefits by not imposing it on those projects. But at the same time, we're in a situation where we have a huge problem with nonprofit displacement, and the mayor's office is putting money into studying long-term alternatives, and we just passed Prop X, I believe it was, that requires replacement space. So we actually hope to be seeing more nonprofit development for
But
health
this is
and
not
human
for all
services.
nonprofits. This is for very specific nonprofits in a very specific niche market, health and human services, right?
Yes, exactly.
How many nonprofits are there in the city that kind of do the work that you're doing?
That's a good question. We don't know. There are hundreds, but there are about, I believe, somewhere around 300 that are city funded.
That are city funded. Would any of
50
them
to
have the capacity to kind of take on such a large project?
There have been.
There have been?
Yes.
Do you know, I mean, how many of the, I'm just trying to understand a little bit better.
No, that's why I mentioned the
idea.
Health Right project that's going on down on Van Ness is very large.
Well, Health Right
And
360 is a unique organization. It's fairly large, it's very
Yes.
robust, it's not in jeopardy of leaving the
10,000
city.
feet is not that big a barrier, and I have seen just in the last couple of years 7,500 square feet, 5,000 square feet. But I think we will be seeing more of that under Prop X as we see these replacement spaces. We hope to see replacement spaces built. So that may happen more. And with the nonprofit displacement money coming out of the mayor's office, there are studies happening of how we can do more of that building ownership rather than rental that would give long-term stability to our programs.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, supervisors. Peter Cohen, Council of Community Housing Organizations. Actually, just want to say that we agree with Walk SF about trying to bump up the emphasis on pedestrian safety. I mean, that seems really ultimately the most primary and primal way of getting around is by walking, and really pedestrian safety should be stronger emphasized with more points or whatever it is. Also agree and support Human Services Network in their argument to have an exemption for city-funded human services nonprofits. I mean, in many respects, the same logic for affordable housing. These are city-funded. They're very specifically targeting certain populations that are quite clearly non-car dependent, and very typically the staff as well. And I think it's a good question, Supervisor Cohen, about the scale of that exemption. That's probably the kind of information that would help us give an idea, certainly not like affordable housing, but there are going to be some organizations that are actually building a facility or doing a very significant rehab that might get caught by this, and I think there's a logic to not including them. There's two other areas of amendments that we are suggesting. One is specifically around affordable housing on site. There is data, and we can work with staff, that shows the deeper the affordability, the lower the car ownership and the vehicle miles traveled. I mean, that's a very well-established fact. So our suggestion is both to have a finding as an amendment to the ordinance that talks about that sort of deepening kind of VMT benefit just by virtue of affordability, and related to that is in the program have the points reflect that with a little bit more nuance. So the more on-site affordable, deeper, the more points. The second amendment has to do with the process. I mean, one thing about letting a developer select entirely is that the local community that has the knowledge may not be able to really opine on what's going to be the most benefit. We think that should be built in to the ordinance as a step of a requirement to
Supervisor Avalos?
No questions. Thank you.
No questions. Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Sean Keegren, RBA. I would like to thank staff for their time. We've met with them 2 or 3 times, and in general, we recognize and agree with the spirit of what they're trying to accomplish. We would suggest a more tailored approach rather than something that's closer to a one-size-fits-all approach. Our concern is that smaller sites require a larger percentage of their footprint to be for utilitarian-type spaces. Whether a site is 37 feet wide or 200 feet wide, it generally has 2 staircases, 2 exits, 1 lobby, a gas room, electric meter room, a transformer room, and an elevator. That amount of space is a much larger percentage on a smaller site than it is a bigger site. Smaller sites have very little room to play with at the ground floor. How many 10 to 24 unit buildings in your neighborhood offer valet parking, car sharing, gymnasiums, bicycle repair stations, doormen, extra bicycle parking? These are the items on which to score points to gain the reduction. Most of those are out of reach for the smaller sites. Our HOA board is almost there as a punishment. It's not something they really want to do, it's something they have to do. And instead, this is going to add one extra layer of burden onto them. A member who recently sold a building, they tried to add a very small locker into the garage. They did not have any room to do it. In short, we would like to participate, but we need a menu of options tailored to the everyday amenities offered in 12 to 24 unit buildings. This menu list is just out of reach for our members. Thank you.
Thank you for your perspective. Is there anyone else that'd like to speak in public comment? Okay, if not, I'd like to bring up Corey Teague back up. Maybe you could speak to a little of the comments that you heard in public comment, particularly Sean Keegren's.
Okay, specifically the last comment.
Specifically the last comment, okay. And if after that you can address whichever.
And I have questions after that for the Walk SF proposed amendments.
Great. Okay, so just to the just prior comment. Yeah, we looked at this for smaller sites. We recognize that really small projects are a different context than mid-rise and very large projects. I would say that I wouldn't describe this program as a one-size-fits-all. I kind of see it as the opposite. We've built it to be as flexible as possible and to include as many measures that we have evidence that work. And there are a lot of measures there, and some of them do take space. There's no question about that. But there are a lot of items that do not take space, whether it is transit subsidies, whether it is bike share, car share memberships. There are certain measures that you can do that, like the real-time transit display, that would go on your wall in the lobby. It doesn't require a lot of square footage on the ground, so to speak. So we feel like there is flexibility there. When you look at the flexibility of the measures and the fact that small projects tend to have a very low target to begin with because they have just a lower raw amount of parking that they're providing. So we feel like, especially when the proposal we included today to reduce the target below 13 points for projects that are smaller and provide less parking is even more helpful to small projects because it gives a little more incentive for those projects to even reduce 1 or 2 parking spaces to achieve an even lower target, and then that space also opens up maybe a little space for a little bit extra bike parking or a bike share room. So we feel like it is flexible enough to accommodate the smaller projects as well as large projects. And then if you want to ask your specific question.
Around non-accessory parking, that was brought up by Walk SF. They asked about that being included as subject to TDM. I think that's an exemption for projects that are merely non-accessory parking.
Right. it's important to kind of separate this out into two separate issues because, and just for the jargon, I mean, when we say accessory parking, we mean parking that's permitted and sometimes required under the code to be dedicated to a specific land use, right? So that's distinguished from non-accessory or principal parking, which is like a parking garage. It's just there for public parking. So the TDM program does not apply just to standalone parking garages because there are no TDM measures to discourage people from driving to a parking garage because that is the sole purpose of that use as a parking garage. You know, if someone was proposing to build a parking garage, who are they going to give transit subsidies to? Why are they going to put a real-time transit display in the
So
parking
did you
garage?
have that conversation with Walk SF?
Absolutely. We've had this conversation, you know, with stakeholders over time. But that's one situation, right? That's just a standalone parking garage. That doesn't happen very often. The other issue that we did acknowledge in a revision to the standards is when you have a project that's being built, let's say, you know, a high-rise residential project or mixed-use project, and they have a certain amount of parking that they include as accessory, and then they request an approval for additional parking that's not accessory. And technically, it's supposed to function as a parking garage, but whether in the real world is it functioning that way? Are they actually using it as de facto accessory parking? And would this encourage those projects to do something, propose something like that to achieve a lower target? Again, we felt this is fundamentally a land use and enforcement issue, but we did acknowledge in the standards that if you have a project where that is you know, a residential or mixed use project that is proposing to essentially build a parking garage into its project, that we would require any of those kind of parking garage spaces up to the amount that is permitted in the code for accessory parking for those uses in the building have to count towards your target. Again, we don't feel like this is a TDM issue as much as a land use and enforcement issue, but we did want to address that, you know, potential loophole and try to discourage people from using that.
And then there was discussion about traffic reduction goals by neighborhood and whether this legislation really addresses that. We have, you know, huge differences in congestion, different parts of the city, and are we drafting, how do we account for how we want to, you know, have a certain approach in a place that has high level of congestion?
I'll let my colleague at MTA address that one.
Thank you. That's a really interesting approach, and it is a totally different methodology that would, you know, we certainly could consider in the future. It would probably take at least another year or 2 years for us to develop all of that data and work that through. It is just not the approach that we pursued and came for. We really wanted to build something that was enabled us to act now using the data that we have and using best practices. And we can certainly consider that in the future, but it's not something we could act on in any near time frame.
And the goal overall, though, is to be able to reduce vehicle miles traveled all across the city.
Across the city. And we believe that this proposed ordinance would do that by reducing the amount of driving from these new developments compared to a scenario without this ordinance in place.
So last question I have is related to the Health and Human Services exemption that's been talked about. You know, here's a couple of points I have is that how prevalent would such exemption need to be made, and how can such an exemption be actually formulated?
Sure, thank you. I mean, this is a challenge that our department and other agencies in the city are working on in terms of just how to help a lot of our smaller nonprofit service agencies stay in the city and be able to operate. And I know we're working on that in a lot of different levels. It's challenging to do it when we're within any metric that uses land uses, because we don't regulate land use based on ownership structure, whether they're for-profit ownership, nonprofit, or only certain types of nonprofit. It gets to be very difficult to do that. The concern here is that an exemption for certain types of nonprofits, that would essentially be a forever exemption. So if we consider a certain nonprofit that would meet this type of exemption to be an office use, for example, and they were in their space for 5 years and they had to leave, and a for-profit office space came in there, there's no trigger there to require that office space to be subject to the TDM ordinance because there's no change of use. And so that's a concern not just for this program but for other planning department, planning code controls and how they may or may not impact nonprofits. We feel like the way this is structured, by and large, will rarely have any impact on those uses, and the reason is because most of those services, exactly for the reasons that were mentioned, that they don't have the capital or the funding to do new construction. It's almost always going into an existing space, an existing building. And right now, as proposed, the change of use trigger for the TDM requirement is 25,000 square feet. And that's very large for those types of uses. And if a use is that large at that point, they are going to be having some impacts on VMT, on the city. And for those types of uses, the TDM measures are really focusing on the employees as much, if not more, than the visitors and their trips to and from that office environment. But by and large, we feel like most of these uses are not going to be doing 25,000 plus square feet changes of use or doing new construction of more than 10,000 square feet.
Has there been an analysis of, it sounds like there hasn't been, in terms of nonprofit usage and vehicle miles traveled, or how much employees nonprofits actually commute by car?
I don't know that we've done it by nonprofit. Again, we do it by specific types of use because, again, when it comes to matters of land use and transportation, often, whether it's a nonprofit or for-profit, as a land use, it still functions similarly. So I'm not aware that there's been any research or data indicating how like a nonprofit office space or service use would differ from a for-profit one.
And you mentioned, is there a way for, hearing from a Health and Human Services nonprofit serving low-income communities, one of the hardships is the fee. Mm-hmm. And if there's going to be a change of use that goes from a nonprofit to, let's say, business that actually has, more revenue to handle additional costs, isn't there like an opt-in way that a nonprofit can request an exemption? Is that something that can be created for the ongoing fee? You said $1,000 a year
for the monitoring and reporting fee over time. So just so I understand, are you saying that could there be a process where, as long as that, even they be subject to the program, but as long as it is a nonprofit, a certain type of service nonprofit, they could apply and be eligible for some type of fee waiver or fee reduction?
Exactly.
That's something that could be constructed. Obviously, anytime our fees are based on an analysis of how much staff time it's going to take to actually do the work. So, anytime we reduce the fee on some of those, we have to account for that somewhere else. But technically speaking, yes, that could be done.
There's also the issue on the other end, on the end of coming up with your TDM plan. One of the menu options, and probably the most important one, is to provide transit benefits for workers and residents. That's something that nonprofits, actually Health and Human Service nonprofits, don't get money for. And every year we go through this budget process that talks about the cost of doing business increasing every year, but the actual grants that Health and Human Services nonprofits get is never large enough to meet, what the cost of business is. So there's another, additional cost that we be putting on, or it's a menu item that I think a Health and Human Service nonprofit would want to be able to, check off and do, but they don't have the resources for it. So, I think that there are constraints that, where the menu doesn't necessarily address that nonprofits have.
And I think the scenario you just described, though, is really a description of every project, because every project has certain constraints and costs, and all of the measures have a cost associated with them that are going to be different for every project for a variety of factors. So that's why we have so many measures, and we have the flexibility built in so that, for whatever reason, your individual project, whether you're a nonprofit service provider or you're, a high-rise residential developer, you can take into account the constraints that you have and select the measures that work best for you. Additionally, these projects tend to, as was mentioned, they tend to often not offer very much parking and have a pretty low target.
And I understand why you haven't been able to measure like the differences in the use of a building and who occupies the space. There are differences that I don't believe are captured in this ordinance that can be seen as a hardship on businesses or nonprofits that serve, low-income communities that don't have a larger profit to deal with the ongoing, menu of options that can have the greatest impact on reducing miles traveled. I don't think it has to get resolved yet, but I think that's something that, I think it's important to look forward to in terms of modifying in the future around how we can address this issue. Because we want to have the greatest impact. We want to make sure that we have the right menu of options for how buildings are being occupied.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Avalos. Is there anything else that you are interested
Yeah,
in?
I do have an amendment of the whole that
Okay.
I'd like to request that the committee accept. And one of them includes a grandfathering in of existing projects. I'm actually open to a different level, one that's actually, I'm open to what the planning department has put forward in terms of the grandfathering in.
That's good to hear, because that's what I was going to propose.
Okay, so what I'd like to do is ask that we accept the amendment of the whole, which I'll explain in a second, and then later you can amend your language into that. All right, so here's the amendment that I have. First is on page 6, lines 6 through 15, adding a finding that cites a study on the relationship between household income and vehicle miles traveled that demonstrates how the TDM value for affordable housing is dependent on the level of affordability. Later, we can look at this finding can address somehow how we might be able to have a different approach for, people who occupy buildings who serve low-income communities who don't have a lot of profit. Next one is on page 9, lines 4 through 7, require that a draft TDM plan be presented at any pre-application meetings that are required for developers, that is meetings with the public, so we have a chance for the public to a chance to weigh in on what is being put forward for measures. The next is allow the planning department to establish a phase-in schedule for implementation for the TDM program for projects that have submitted development applications before September 6th. This is the one that you will be amending based on language that is being provided by the planning department. The fourth is page 12, lines 16 through 17, just addressing a clerical issue. There's an amendment that will show that future reports on the TDM program are presented to the board and how they're done so. So those will be the amendments of the whole that I'd like to request that the committee adopts.
All right, thank you very much. I don't know, colleagues, if there's any discussion. I'd like to go ahead and give a couple of remarks. First of all, I want to give compliments to the planning department and the MTA. Based on the presentation, it's clear and very evident that a lot of hard work and thought has gone into making this policy as thoughtful and as inclusive as possible. I know it's not I know it's not easy, and it's a very difficult job. So my compliments to you, those members that are here in the chamber today, those that are in the office that are not here on the presentation team. I know a lot of people went into making this possible. Also want to recognize the folks that came in for public comment. I think that it was the comment that I heard was very thoughtful, and I would hope that they would continue to be part of the discussion as we really hammer out the tweaks for this important policy that also includes developers that stand to be impacted by some of these proposals. So a couple things. First, I want to, Supervisor Avalos has we have a little bit of a difference in, I think, the grandfathering clause, our vision for the grandfathering clause. And he indicated that he would be amenable to what I'm going to suggest. And my suggestion comes from the Planning Department, the memo I'll read it into the record. Let me see here. Table for development projects with a development application on or before September 4th, 2016, shall be subject to 50% of the target. For development projects with a development application on or after September 5th, 2016, and before January 1st, 2018, shall be subject to 75% of the target. For development projects with a development application on or after January 1st, 2018, shall be subject to 100% of the target. 3, for development projects with a development application on or before September 4th, 2016, shall be subject to 50% of the target. For development projects with a development application on or after September 5th, 2016, and before January 1st, 2018, shall be subject to 75% of the target. For development projects with a development application on or after January 1st, 2018, shall be subject to 100% of the target. So, folks, this is the...
You want to make an amendment for that to
Yes.
add an amendment to my amendment of the whole?
Yes, that is what I would like to do. Thank you for cleaning that up. I wanted to read the language into the record so that everyone is clear what we're trying to do. So we're going to be making an amendment to the amendment of the whole, substituting a small section of what Supervisor Avalos is proposing. And if we could take that without objection, colleagues. Without objection, the motion passes. Thank you. Now, this is also a pretty substantial and important and dense discussion that we have had here today, and I'd like to take a week to continue to work on this and continue to do our due diligence with our stakeholders. So if we could, Madam Clerk, in 1 week's time, what is the date for next week? Is it?
That would be December 5th.
December 5th, all right. I'd like to make a motion that we continue this item to December 5th. Is there any objection?
Before making the vote on that, I do have one other thing I wanted to express, and maybe we can look at between now and next week. In one of the comments was discussed how we're addressing, we're doing our parking TDM plan by unit, but there are buildings that actually have units that have multiple bedrooms, and I want to see if we can get an answer to that in the next week. About is there a different approach we might take for that, how to accommodate that issue. It is a policy of the city that we want to build family housing, so is there a way that, we have a accommodation for that in this legislation, or how do we might address creating that incentive for family housing?
All right, thank you. So, colleagues, I've made a motion to continue this item without objection. The motion passes unanimously. Thank you.
And before we adjourn, Madam Chair, I just want to say it's been a pleasure serving with our colleague Supervisor Weiner on the Land Use Committee for the last year, and this is his last Land Use Committee, so I just wanted to acknowledge that and say it's been a pleasure serving with you, Scott.
Thank you, Supervisor Peskin, for once again jumping the gun.
Sorry.
It's okay. You're forgiven. So, like Supervisor Peskin said, this is the last Land Use Committee meeting that our colleague Scott Weiner will be a member of. He has joined me in this committee for 6 years, that the entire duration on the Board of Supervisors. And Scott, just wanted you to know how much of a pleasure it's been to serve and to work with you. And for the most part, I think we've seen eye to eye, but in those rare moments when we have not seen eye to eye, you've been a worthy opponent. And I just want to give you an opportunity to say a few remarks if you'd like.
Sure. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you, Supervisor Peskin, for your kind words as well. As the Chair just mentioned, it's been an honor to serve on this committee, first the Land Use and Economic Development Committee, now the Land Use and Transportation Committee, recognizing that those two subjects are very intertwined. to serve on this committee for 6 years. Feel very lucky that for the entirety of my 6 years on the Board of Supervisors, I've been able to serve on a committee that I'm so passionate about around the housing and transportation issues in particular that are so critical for the city's future. And it's just been a deep honor to be able to serve on this committee. This committee is not always an easy one to serve on. Issues have flowed through this committee that have been unbelievably contentious. And they're contentious because they're important, whether it's an individual project or whether it's just a major land use issue in the city. And it has been an honor to be able to be involved in those discussions and those debates. And Madam Chair, you're correct. You and I think the minute we came onto this board in January 2011, we went on to this committee, and it's been a real pleasure serving with you and handing off leadership back and forth. And I'm going to miss this committee. So, colleagues, thank you very much. I'm very, very appreciative.
Thank you. Supervisor Avalos, you spent a lot of time in this committee, too.
Yeah, I've been here in this committee a lot with Scott. And the whole time I was here today, you didn't say a single word, so I was very surprised. But I'm sure you said something before on the items that were before us, before I came in. So, but it was kind of a rare meeting where you didn't say anything. So I actually, I want to thank you for serving with us on the Board of Supervisors. We didn't always see eye to eye, but there's a lot of overlap. We've worked on projects together. But what you've contributed to the city and county of San Francisco as a supervisor, and I'll probably say it tomorrow at the full board, is that you brought us to a whole other standard of engagement with each other. And we actually worked a lot harder to decipher and sift through a lot of policy based on your work and based on the tensions that have been created in creating legislation that I think have moved the city forward, in particular around how we address development and transportation. I think where you came in with a huge emphasis on transportation, that actually moved Ed Lee forward to actually be more attentive to our transportation needs that no mayor before had ever done. And so I really believe that you were part of that, and the city's better for it. And we didn't always agree on what the right approach was going to be, but I think we're in a better place than we were before you being here.
Thank you very much. Madam Clerk, are there any other items before us today?
That concludes our business for today.
Thank you. This meeting is adjourned.